trying it one more time, and I hope people can hear me this time. This is called Time Out for Nutball. Everybody needs to feel better. Well, yeah, the pet person, the pet parent needs to feel better when dogs are out of control. But the dog does too, because so often they're out of control because they don't understand the communication that's coming from their human leader. See, dogs are genetically programmed to understand canine communication. And they certainly are domestic pets. I mean, they belong with us. But there are some differences. They're not just like us. In fact, one really important difference is that they believe that interactions of any kind at all with their leader are earned. They don't believe that they have a interaction entitlement. Okay? And people in our lives do, but our dogs see it differently. Now, you can hope that your dog will learn how to understand and think just like one of us people, but you're sort of kidding yourself. And if you've had dogs in your life who seem to go along with everything you wanted and really didn't need a lot of hands-on management, well, you've been fortunate, because those dogs, they look at you and they go, "You don't get it, do you?" But the dog says, "Well, I'm adaptable, I can adjust," and they do. Well, the reality is that if you have a dog who has even a moderate degree of anxiety, they really need predictability. They need to understand, in very simple, straightforward terms, how do I function successfully in this home, in this relationship? Well, you are smarter than your dog. No, really, you are. And you can learn canine leadership, and your dog really is not capable of catching on to human followership. So the onus is on you, the person. So how will we manage this thing? Well, we've talked before about ignoring, and that's a really critically important skill. It is largely how the leader of a canine social group teaches his or her subordinates what is acceptable and what will earn a resource, including a response from the leader, access to food, access to outside the territory, opportunities to help the group catch some food resources, all of those things, the things that assure survival. Well, dogs want to earn that. And they look to us as though, like we get it. So, if your dog does something you want, for goodness sake, catch him doing something right. And if you've been to the parenting meetings and the leadership books that you've read, you know, hey, that's what they tell us to do with other people. And it sure as heck works with dogs, because they believe that everything that they get from us is earned, including a response. So if you come home from work and your dog is body slamming you, or if your dog is barking incessantly at something outside, or your dog starts to mix it up with one of your other pets, and you do what's natural to us, which is stop that, cut that out, right? Well, the dog says, I earned that response. And they will repeat the behavior that earned it. Even though you didn't do it as an earned privilege, that is how the dog saw it. So what you absolutely must get to be a world-class skill is ignoring. So let's say you ignore, and you do a really good job of it. I mean, of the 100 billion active neurons in your brain, not a single one of them has your dog's name, like Miss America here. And you're really, really good at this. But the dog naturally is watching you, her leader, but when she gets really out of control, she's not. And that's not the healthy thing at all. And so how do you control that dog without making the mistake of responding to something you never want to see again? Well, you can banish to time out, but you have to be ready. So here's a letter I got from a lady named Elena, and she sent me this question. She said, "Hi," and I think it's a great way to greet me, by the way. You don't have to say, "Dear Jeff," or something like that. Hi is good. "It's recommended to ignore unwanted behavior. How do I deal with my dog's out-of-the-blue occasional aggression toward another dog?" Well, you certainly don't want your dog believing that you're responding to it. But if you know your dog has that tendency, then you need to be prepared, like a good scout. And that means that whether your dog is on a leash walk with you, which of course you have your dog on a leash, or these kinds of unhealthy, undesirable behaviors are prone to occur at home, I suggest leaving a 6-foot or longer leash attached to your dog's collar around the house all the time. And so if you notice behavior that you don't want, number one, you ignore completely, and secondly, you step on the leash, what we call a drag line, because your dog is dragging it from her collar all the time around the house. Or if you're on a leash walk, you already have the darn thing in your hand, and you immediately step on it so you don't have to make a dive for it like an outfielder, and you pick it up and turn on your heel and march with purpose to another room. Get one figured out in advance, a pre-designated timeout room. And you're marching in there, pulling this leash along with you, and in your brain, there is nobody attached to the other end of that leash. I mean, if you feel some action on that leash as you're making tracks toward that timeout room, it must be a poltergeist, because there is no DOG, because you're an Olympic level ignorer, and you head into that other room and you drop the leash on the floor and you close the door and walk away. Now, if you hear some noise coming out of there, some, crying, complaining, and scratching, it's got to be that poltergeist again, because it isn't the DOG, because you're really good at ignoring. And when there's no noise coming out of that timeout room where you have banished your dog, 3 or 4 minutes of silence, or if there's no noise at all, wait 3 or 4 minutes, and then go ahead and open the door. But you're not going to greet anybody, because there's no emotion attached to any part of this event. You just open the door as though, well, you own the place. You don't have to have a reason. You just open the door and walk away. And 3 or 4 minutes later, you can steal a quick glance at that non-existent dog. And if she's minding her own business, then you very quietly say, "Good dog." And the very quietly part is important, because your dog will follow your emotional lead, especially if she's not so way over her threshold for loss of impulse control. She is paying attention, as a dog naturally should. And so your dog says, being calm just earned a reinforcer from my leader. And, well, my leader sets the emotional tone, and she's calm, and, well, so am I. Okay? That doesn't mean you always have to be calm and sedate with your dog. You can be as wild and goofy as you enjoy being with her or him, but in the appropriate context. So if there are situations where you want to be raucous and wild and out of control, then knock yourself out. But if there are situations where you want your dog to consistently be calm, and then with what's called differential reinforcement, that's the behavioral term for it, where you ignore completely undesirable behavior, but you reinforce what you do want, desirable behavior, and do it by setting the emotional tone and repeat it hundreds of times and never missing a chance to tell her she's good when she is. And I say she because my dog is a girl. Then your dog will finally catch on. So I, of course, put that in much shorter form in my response to Elena, who asked me this question on Facebook. And so she had a follow-up question. So she said, "I have one dog who occasionally goes off on another dog at the dog park. If I understand what you're saying, at the first sign of anxiety or discomfort, I will attach the leash and pull him, my dog, and keep walking." Well, okay, let me give you a little clarification on that, Elena. What's really important is that if your dog is at the dog park, and these are off-leash parks for a good reason, because dogs don't need this artificial constraint. They need to be out there being who they really are, off territory. How the heck can you control a dog who is going to create a problem with another dog? You could be chasing after him and yelling and saying, "Stop that," but of course we know what happens then. But what if your dog were dragging a leash around at the dog park? Now, it would probably be much better to have a much longer than 6-foot leash, and what I encourage people to do is to go to a hardware store. Ace Hardwares have these in particular. You can buy 20, 30, 40 feet if you want, lightweight nylon cord that you attach to the dog's collar, and your dog drags around this lightweight long line. It is so lightweight that your dog isn't going to notice it, and so it isn't this artificial barrier of a leash. But you have the opportunity to salvage a situation. If you really need to, if you feel like you must, you can keep hold of the other end of that lightweight nylon cord. It's totally strong, narrow gauge is fine. And you can trot around behind your dog holding it as long as you keep slacking it. Your dog isn't going to feel this and be, wigged out by it. Or you can just let the dog drag it around, and if you get concerned, you remain silent because you're ignoring, and you step on the end of that lightweight long line, you pick it up and you turn on your heel and you leave the dog park. It is an excellent way to control a dog without interfering with the dog's innate need to sniff and investigate and interact with these other dogs. What's really important about not putting the drag line or the lightweight long line that your dog is dragging, the reason that you don't put it on when you need it, a couple of good things. One is you approach your dog with a leash of some kind at a time when it's inappropriately behaving. The dog says, well, here comes my leader. I must have earned that response. And even if you think you're ignoring, as you reach over and grab your dog's collar to put this leash on it, that's not the dog's takeaway. So, you've inadvertently reinforced the wrong behavior. And the other problem is that in Elena's dog's case, at the dog park, if this dog is starting to get agitated and directing some hostility at this other dog, and she makes the mistake of reaching in to get hold of her dog's collar, well, you obstruct a dog's access to the target of its aggression, and the dog can turn around and bite whatever it was that got in its way. And your dog is over a threshold, lost control of itself, not looking at its leader for behavioral cues, doesn't recognize that it's your hand, could be a broom handle. That dog's going to bite whatever it is that obstructed its access because it really is targeting the other dog. So if you reach in, you might be at the receiving end of what's called redirected aggression. Very simply, the dog is redirecting its focus from the other dog to whatever got in the way, your hand, and you can get very badly injured. You should absolutely never reach into a dog fight. And so if you have any reason to suspect that that might occur, then you always leave a leash on your dog so that if that kind of thing begins to occur, you simply pick up the leash and you walk away with it. So, back to banishing in the house. How often can you do it? Well, there are some people in my exam room where I practice behavior medicine, and they think, gosh, I could banish this dog 100 times a day. And I say, go for it. You don't even have to simply say, all right, I'm going to try to ignore for several seconds, and if it gets out of control, then I'll pick up the drag line and banish. You can do that, as long as you're a good ignorer. Or you can simply say, look, forget this ignoring business. I'm just going to pick up the drag line and banish every single time. Absolutely, because banishment is really nothing more than advanced ignoring. It's really the same thing. You're just marching with that drag line to the timeout room, closing the door. And of course, at that point, you don't really have to ignore, because if you had a dog on the other side of that door, it wouldn't see you anyway. Okay? So banishment, do it all you want. But the key to this whole thing is absolutely don't make the mistake of inadvertently reinforcing behaviors you don't want. But when you see a dog who's calm or who's been highly agitated, but sneaking a quick glance, you can see, oh, we're starting to calm a little bit. Reinforce that. Reinforce every chance you get, because the dog says, okay, I keep getting a paycheck for this job, and I lose the paycheck for this other one. That's right, you. I'll go to the job with a paycheck. So I'm happy to entertain questions of any kind at all. And I'm also happy to keep going with this thing after we shut off the camera and answer a few questions on Facebook. I'm really glad you've come, and anybody who has questions later, by all means. And if you have any comments now, I'm happy to address them. And if you share this with your friends and they have questions, they're welcome. And next week, I'm going to do another Facebook Live on Thursday evening, 6 o'clock Mountain, which I think will make it 8 o'clock Eastern. And I'm going to do that one on, I haven't decided yet. But what I'm working on right now is a series of 3 videos on child safety with pets, cats and dogs. It's going to be a series of 3 because the first video is going to address the broad issues of pet safety with children. And then video number 2 will be dog safety, and video number 3 will be cat safety. We're going to address this from the standpoint of not only what to do, but how to know when you may be having a problem to prevent trouble. But I'm going to bring into this thing some of the research that gives us some very good clarity on why we have to do what we have to do, and the misinterpretation that many well-meaning parents, grandparents, and other folks who look after little kids, they believe they know what to look for, and sometimes they're sure stuff that just ain't so. And we don't want anybody getting hurt. Safety is the #1 concern. You can break all the rules of pet management, but as long as everything is safe, then I'm happy. I don't want anybody getting hurt. Nobody else does either. Invite your friends to go to my website too, by the way, drjeffnichol.com, drjeffnichol. And anybody who subscribes, I will send them at this point my free at-home pet first aid and CPR guide. And then at some point when I get this video series finished, they'll get exclusive access to that. It won't be available anyplace else. It's going to take me a little while, though. And every Tuesday morning, if you subscribe, you'll get my the newspaper column from the Albuquerque Journal from the week previous, and you'll get that week's video or blog in addition. And I've almost always got one of those things in addition to my my newspaper column. So thanks again for tuning in. Miss America, say good night. And Tony, I don't know if you folks can see Tony. He's here. Gaston, he's on the other side of the camera. Have a great evening.